Good morning, Revolution, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. I am Taryn. I'm filling in this week for Joe. We're so pleased to see Rosanna back with us from China, Anita and Scott. Good morning, everyone. Today on the show, we're going to be discussing the wars in Ukraine and in Gaza and how that sort of ties into our own domestic policies here in the United States. There's been sort of a power play in Congress over this war financing. We're going to discuss that. Then we're going to talk together about the struggle for abortion rights in this country, how those have been intensifying, especially in the run up to the 2024 elections. This is going to be a huge issue for a lot of voters. So we're going to be talking about that as well. And we're also going to touch on the 2024 economic outlook, since all of the newspapers are telling us that next year it's going to be awesome. We're going to discuss whether or not it's going to be awesome and maybe what's behind it being awesome or not. And then finally, we've got our mailbag question that we'll be addressing. But first, I just want to welcome Rosanna back. Rosanna, you were just in China, right?
Yes,
Would you like to share a little bit about what you were doing there?
sure. It was the 13th Socialist Forum that was held and sponsored by the Academy of Social Sciences in China. And it had about 78 participants from 38 countries. Not all of them were from the communist parties. Some were professors, academic professors, writers, publishing companies, talking about the state of the socialist movement as well as the stage that we're living in terms of the decay of capitalism and how do we respond to that, and more importantly, how do we unite as a socialist movement to build a socialist society in our respective countries. So that's kind of an overall. We were also taken on tour to different provinces after the forum, where we also had some discussions about how we see the world in other two other Marxist schools. One in particular was the oh, I forgot the name right now, but it brought in a lot of the students of that university, and 90% of them were women. And the purpose, I was told, was because they wanted to bring more women into leadership of the Communist Party of China, and that's their part of their effort to do so.
That's amazing. That's really cool. That's great. You got to see firsthand sort of the internationalism of the world communist movement and help to strengthen that. And I guess that kind of helps us segue into our first point, which is looking at US imperialism and its role in the world. So, Scott, would you like to talk to us a little bit about what's going on in Congress with Ukraine and financing Ukraine?
Yeah. So the big news this week on that front is that Congress adjourned for the year without reaching a deal to provide more military aid for Ukraine, or more U.S. funding to perpetuate the war in Ukraine, which is really, I don't think we should consider as aid in any real sense. And in some sense, this sounds like a really good thing, right? Because we are against sending more weapons to perpetuate that war. We want a peace process. But if we look a little bit closer, that's not really what's happening. What we see is the Republican Party, or the sort of most right-wing faction of the Republican Party, using Ukraine aid as a bargaining chip to demand much more restrictive policies on the border, even than those that are already in place. So they know that Democrats are really, really desperate, right, to not be seen as abandoning Ukraine or whatever. So they're trying to force through a much more restrictive border deal, and it seems to be working, right? There seems to be more and more support for a rightward shift on immigration, and this is really bad news, right? Because if we look at the past few months, we've seen, we're in a fight against fascism. We need the unity of every, section of the democratic forces, everyone that opposes fascism. And the policies of the Biden administration are making that more and more difficult, right? We've seen how the insistence on enabling Israel's genocide in Gaza is, um, alienating a lot of not only Palestinian American and Muslim voters in the U.S., but also a lot of young people in the Democratic Party. Now we see signs that Democratic leadership is moving toward, a deal with the right on its border priorities, uh, which is going to, further fracture the unity that we need, um, and all for what, right? All to support the the war profiteering, right? The profits of the weapons manufacturers. This and the project of U.S. imperialism. So this is an incredibly dangerous situation, and I think worthy of condemnation, obviously.
Right. Right. Well, but Anita, I thought that the party, the Communist Party, is in favor of a ceasefire and negotiations when it comes to Ukraine. Do you think that this outcome is something that we should look forward to as being a result of this recent maneuvering in Congress? Basically, should we be in support of defunding Ukraine through these avenues?
I don't see this as a possible outcome. I think Ukraine should have been working on some sort of a political agreement from the very beginning, like South Africa and China were suggesting that they could step in and help negotiate that peace. And I think tying it with the immigration situation is just a dead end for everybody. I think there is a real problem with immigrants being bused to the big cities and ending up sleeping on the streets, but we are not taking any steps, and Congress is not taking any steps to really address that problem. And really maybe reduce the sanctions that are driving people away from their homes. Giving humanitarian aid, we give so much more aid to countries in the Middle East than we do to countries in the global South in our own hemisphere. And we are making, US imperialism has created untenable positions down there, people suffering from all kinds of violence, the drug cartels and whatnot. They are escaping that violence by coming north of the border. And then we're the GOP would like to codify Donald Trump's policies of detaining them in these for-profit prisons or deporting them without even considering their asylum claims. It's just a lose-lose situation.
Right, for sure. Rosanna, I'm really confused because I keep on hearing how next year the fight is against the fascist threat. I understand that I don't want Donald Trump to be president. I don't want the GOP to be in power. I think that we're at a very dangerous stage of development for the Republican Party, and I think them getting more power is the worst thing possible. At the same time, it seems as though the majority of Americans, and certainly the majority of the Democratic Party, are in favor of an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. They're also in favor of rights for immigrants, to not have this situation unfold. So why is it? I mean, from my perspective, it feels like the Democrats are shooting themselves in the foot right now when it comes to next year's election, because as Scott was saying earlier, they're alienating the Latino vote, they're alienating the Muslim American and Arab American votes, and also the votes of young progressives. Why is it you think that the Democrats are continuing on with this when it seems to be just like grotesquely unpopular? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry about that. I have
Sorry.
a slight cough, so I think capitalists will be capitalist, but I think that we have to we have to respond in the real world. And in the real world tells us that a Donald Trump fascist, full on fascist sent ideas and moves and things like that will make it easy, will make it 10 times harder for us to continue the struggle for us to continue our moving forward in winning people's rights, stopping these wars, immigrant rights, ending sanctions, all of these kinds of things. We don't like the situation, but but it's our reality, and if we don't work in our reality, we're gonna bound to make a huge bunch of mistakes that will cost a lot of people's lives, a lot of suffering. So we have to really work within our what we've got, the hand we're dealt with. Like if you play cards and stuff like that, you will know that that's what you've got. And so my feeling is that people really need to get out there and vote. Show that we really, it's not just about the polls, it's about actions. We see what's happening, with people constantly demonstrating against the war in Gaza, against the injustice that's being plagued on the Palestinian community and people. And we see that it is bringing some results slowly, but we need to continue that pressure. We need to have the ability. We have to have that kind of terrain in order for us to continue that ability to bring about fundamental change in the most favorable of terrains that we have. Not that we would like to have, and that's really important. Not to um, confuse with what we want with what we have, and that's really key in this struggle and in this movement towards a better world.
Yeah, for sure. But Scott, let's pretend like, you're talking to a young person. Maybe this is their first time voting next year in the election. And they say, you know what? I think the way to send a message to the Democrats is to vote for a third party candidate who sees everything eye to eye when it comes to Ukraine, when it comes to Gaza, when it comes to immigration. I think that the way to make that change is to vote third party. How would you explain it to someone who's so, young, who this would be their first election, who maybe didn't live through the Trump years or the Bush years? How would you encourage them to see further down the road as to what the impact would be with another Trump presidency?
Well, the first thing I would say is that um, voting for the working class is not the same as it is for the ruling class. And if we think of our vote, um, so if we think of our vote as like a little piece of private property that we're going to expend on, whatever candidate we think is the best, that's not a working class approach. That's treating our vote like money. That's how people, that's the model of democracy proposed by the bourgeoisie, right? A working class approach to voting is one that sees our vote as a means of collective participation. What is a thing that we can all do, pooling our resources together to achieve the best possible outcome, as Rosanna said, given the hand we're dealt. And specifically regarding a Trump presidency and the question of Palestinian liberation and Palestinian self-determination, remember that it was Donald Trump who signaled his allegiance with the most hardline extremist Zionist forces in Israel by moving the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem, and in fact, if I remember correctly, to illegally occupied Palestinian territory in East Jerusalem, as a signal that the United States would back the most, right-wing and violent section of the Israeli ruling class all the way. So I think, yes, the actions of the Biden administration are reprehensible. They need to be, we need to build that movement, get out there, demand ceasefire now, and keep demanding it until it happens. But to think that, that Biden is the, main one responsible, or that voting for a third party candidate is somehow going to actually create change or express, the power of a movement or the power of the working class, for me, that's a non-starter.
Right, for sure. Well, and as our producer is informing us, so I think that the military aid to Israel, the ask is about $14 billion. And I think that the ask for military aid, again, this is, not aid, it's a subsidy for the US arms manufacturers, but that the ask to Ukraine is about 4 or 5 times that much. But as our producer is reminding me, $333 billion has gone to border militarization, to ICE and CPB since the creation of the Department of Homeland Security in 2003. And almost $200 billion to police in this country anyway, every single year. Anita, do you think that people who might agree with joining forces with the Republicans to, get rid of these wars by attacking immigrants or by, further stigmatizing migrant movement in the United States, do you think that that's a bad idea or something that we could do and then go back on eventually?
Well, I'm not sure. I'm going to go back to the idea that you want a candidate, for example, next November who will suit you completely, point by point. I think we have to struggle on all of these fronts, but also the election is next November. I don't think we are so lacking in agency that we should, as a reaction to all of the horrible atrocities that are going on in Gaza, for example, we should make a decision about what we're going to do next November. I mean, we need to do things right now, and I think demanding a ceasefire and demanding that we do not, codified Donald Trump's immigration plans is the appropriate response right now, and not thinking about the election that's 12 months away still.
Sure. And speaking of agency, I was hoping that you could give us a little bit of insight into what's going on with the abortion struggle right now, because I understand that that is something that is definitely still going to be on a vast majority of the population's mind come next November. So could you get us up to speed on what's happening? I know there's a lot going on in Ohio, Kentucky, and Texas. If you could.
Well, exactly. There is. We're really attuned to it in Ohio because we have an amendment in our state constitution now that protects women in Ohio and gives us the rights that we had under Roe v. Wade. But ever since the Dobbs decision, the anti-abortion forces have been pushing and pushing and pushing to try to get other victories in other places. And one of the ways they did this was a group of doctors sued in Amarillo, Texas, where they knew they would get this one judge, Matthew Kacsmaryk, and he was a Trump appointee, and he was an anti-abortion activist before he was a judge, and he ruled that the FDA made a mistake 2 decades ago, making this completely safe drug, mifepristone, legal. Ever since then, when the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals did overturn Kacsmaryk's ruling, and but they did put limits on the drug itself. So now the SCOTUS Supreme Court has agreed to study this. They're not going to go back apparently and and underscore Kacsmaryk's ruling, but they can make mifepristone much more unavailable or much more difficult to obtain. And this is going on with a backdrop of all of the horrible situations that are a result of the Dobbs decision, and that is women who are being denied abortion care, denied miscarriage care till they're on the brink of death, and worse. And there was this case in Texas where a woman was had to appeal to the courts for permission to abort an unviable fetus. So it's a struggle that's going on in all the states. Dobbs tossed the decision back to the states, and as a result, state courts and state legislatures are where these struggles are taking place. And it's hard to keep track of all of them, but it's the same kind of thing happening across the country.
For sure, yeah. I mean, I obviously care very deeply about the abortion issue as someone who can have an abortion, as someone who has had an abortion. It's deeply personal to me. But Scott, why is this a political question? Why is this so important to the party, whether or not people have access to abortion?
Well, this is important to the party because reproductive autonomy, control of your own body, is a basic democratic right of all people. And as communists, we can't back away from that. We can't back away from the rights of women in particular to exercise their autonomy of their own over their own body, because when we do that, we compromise the possibility of uniting the working class as a whole, right? That's the whole approach to democracy, the whole understanding of the importance of fighting against all forms of special oppression, against male supremacy and misogyny, against racism, against homophobia and transphobia. All the forms of special oppression are used by the capitalist class to divide us. So if we can't unite around those basic democratic issues, there's no hope of building the movement that will eventually be able to overthrow capitalism. And also, it's just such a basic thing, right? We have, the Republican Party loves to talk about like free speech rights, and they're all about the free speech rights of corporations when it comes to spending money. But the most basic questions of freedom, control over your own body, control over your right to express your gender in the way that you live it. Those things they oppose. So for me, this is it's ridiculous that we have to fight on this, but we will fight on it because it's an incredibly important struggle.
Yeah. I think that, as far as bodily autonomy goes, I agree with a lot of what you're saying. But what about people who, for instance, were saying that they don't believe in vaccines or vaccine mandates? There's a lot of that where people will say, well, this is about my bodily autonomy. Rosanna, what do you think is going to be the impact on women workers if more and more women are forced to basically be pregnant and give birth? I noticed that in Ohio, there was a case of a woman recently, an African American woman, who had a miscarriage and then was actually charged with felony abuse of a corpse because she had a miscarriage. How does this affect women in the workplace? Obviously, women are working at home as well as at a wage labor job, but how does this sort of affect women on the job when they're being disrespected like this, when as a gender or as a sex, they're not able to exercise that autonomy that Scott was just referring to?
Well, I think it makes women overall very concerned about, whether they're going to get accused, even if they have a miscarriage, whether they're going to get accused of an abortion and then put in jail. So it can increase women in jail. It could increase just the fear. It'll definitely, and I believe it already has definitely increased women seeking other alternative forms of abortion that can be deadly, are deadly, um, uh, and resorting to desperate measures because economically they just can't support another child, and so or they just just not able to care for another child or a child, and so it just creates this extra tension. It creates this it adds to that sense of not being worthy enough as a woman, that you don't even have the ability or the right to determine what's best for you in your life overall, to decide what path you want to take in your life. So a lot of this decision making, that that develops you as an individual, as a woman, are those kinds of rights are taken away from you indirectly, but nonetheless, it really has even an internal effect, emotional effect on you, whether you are of bearing age or not. It
Mhm.
still has this, that sense of being attacked, a sense of uh, you're not a full human being because you don't have full human rights.
Right, for sure. Scott, do you think that this is an opportunity for all genders to sort of unite around this common question? Because my concern is that this sort of draconian measures against women and people who can have abortions is actually causing more of a dependency of women on the men in their life, whether or not that's their partner, whether or not that's an abusive spouse, whether or not that's their boss. I mean, Andrea Dworkin once said that every woman is one man away from eviction. Do you think that this could be an opportunity to build better solidarity between the working class in this struggle?
Absolutely. Between within the working class and across all all the different forms of oppression, capitalism can only survive, and capitalist power can only survive as long as it can produce vulnerable people, people who are in a position to be exploited, and this is part of that. So the challenge facing us is precisely to unite around making sure that we can counter all of these efforts to push people into situations of precarity, of vulnerability, of
Mm.
criminalization. Uh, so yeah, this as we've said before, this is not just a fight for you know people with uteruses. This is a fight for everybody, and it's a fight to build to build unity and democratic power,
Yeah.
small group democratic power.
Yeah. Well, speaking of power and speaking of the working class, it seems as though we have a rosy economic outlook for 2024. I don't know how everyone else's stock portfolios have been performing. Ha 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 ha. But it seems as though the market has been going up in the last month or so. And that might be because the Federal Reserve is forecasting that there will be 3 rate cuts next year. Let me put my economics professor hat on for a second. So the Federal Reserve basically exists to lend money to banks, right? And the rate at which they lend that money to banks is going to affect everyone else's interest rate. If you want to buy a house, for instance, I would be shocked if anybody in this country could have bought a house in the last year because the new mortgage rates were so high. If you wanted to start a business, it would become more expensive for you to do that. And this was said to be in response to increasing inflation. So, for prices going up across the board, the way that the Federal Reserve thought would be a good way of fixing this is by hiking interest rates to keep people from buying houses or starting new businesses. And then inflation would go down because people could afford less. I guess a good way of thinking about it is that the Federal Reserve is in charge of deciding how much money is going to be flowing into the economy. When rates are very, very low, that means a lot of money will be flowing into the economy. When rates are very high, it means that money will not be flowing into the economy. And so things are going to gum up a little bit. Do you see this as a positive or a negative development, Anita? The Federal Reserve deciding to cut interest rates. They say it's going to happen 3 times next year, probably just in time for the November election. What do you think about that?
Well, there you have it, Taryn. I think there are political consequences to this, because as you know, the Biden administration has really hit hard on the economy issue. And although many indicators in many economic indicators are showing, improvement, there's still a general feeling that when Trump was in office, people's 401ks were were higher, and that is all some people need to hear when they're making their decisions about whom to vote for, is just how it's going to affect my own personal bottom line instead of the greater good for the greater number. It's I'm not an economist, so I bow to your expertise here. I guess this is not capitalism has cycles, and they have cycles of crises. And this crisis was different than previous crises probably because it was really caused by the pandemic. And I think that has thrown a spanner into the works in terms of predicting how things are going to go. So I suppose I will just take this decision that they've made, or this announcement that they made, on the face of it, and think about the political consequences. And I guess this is going to be better for the Democratic Party going forward, that they have not completely tanked the economy going into the 24 election.
Right. Well, sometimes I open up these financial publications and I'm looking at what they're saying on the news, and I look at the stock market. I don't have any stocks. And I look at the stock market and I see this number going up, and I think to myself, it seems as though other people are really excited about this. I don't really see how it's necessarily going to change my life or the life of lots of people that I know. Rosanna, what do you think about how the economy is currently for the working class? Like, for instance, do you think that higher unionization rates might be something that's a little bit more important to people over Federal Reserve cuts, a stronger, NLRB, for instance? What do you think? Because sometimes we see stuff on television and we say, okay, well, that's how it's supposed to be. But then you look out the window and you see something, on 23rd Street here, there's homeless people, there's people struggling to make rent, struggling to pay for healthcare, et cetera. What do you think about that, Rosanna?
Well, I agree with you. When we talk about the interest rates and the forecast and things like that, I question how really it's going to affect the overall population of our country. How, unless they address the real issue of poverty, the homeless issue, it's not going to have the kind of effect that they tell us it will have. They make us believe that it's going to have. So I think I think it is important for people to unite and fight for a higher salary, and fight for what they produce in terms of the wealth, just like the Starbucks workers and Amazon workers and all the workers uh, that are getting minimum wage. And I know the minimum wage will be going up this coming on the 20 this this coming year, but it's still not enough. It's not a sustainable, it's not a livable wage. So, workers have to unite in their respective jobs, and not just that, but support each other. If the Starbucks workers are on strike, let's not go and purchase anything from Starbucks. Let's show our solidarity, and this is the way that we're really going to win some of the battles. We're really going to bring about a higher livable wage. We are, it's united, not individually, but united, and in this effort. And so that's the task for all of us to do, is to build that unity at all the work sites. And show the power, just as this past year has shown the power of workers. We have even a greater power, and but it requires us to build unity and support and solidarity with each other.
Yeah, for sure. Scott, obviously, we don't have anything to do with the Federal Reserve or determining rate cuts or rate hikes or anything like that. But what do you think that the Communist Party would offer a little bit differently in 2024 than just simply saying, well, we'll make sure that your 401k comes up? Like, how might the party's approach to dealing with the economy be a little bit different than just depending on the Federal Reserve's monetary policy?
Well, I think you really put your finger on it, right? The Federal Reserve is a very weak and limited tool for actually, advancing working class interests. You can lower interest rates, which will, in theory, make more jobs available, but even that's not perfect. And there are plenty, in fact, of big capitalists who are, opposed to rate cuts at this point because they want to discipline the labor force. They want to force more people into what Marx called the reserve army of labor, right? Into the ranks of the unemployed that will drive the cost of labor down. What the Communist Party would do differently, I mean, I think, we just have to take certain basic things off the table when it comes to what can be taken away from people, right? Housing is a basic human right. Food is a basic human right. Education, healthcare, energy, those things, like your access to those things should not depend on whether you have a job or not, on what your income is at your job. So that would be the biggest change, right? Taking those things out of, basically capitalism rations out the necessities of life based on, how much money you have. And we would stop that.
Okay. And that kind of leads us very well into this week's mailbag question, actually, which is addressing the party. Says, does the CPUSA have a platform with clearly outlined policy objectives? If so, what are they? If not, why doesn't the Communist Party have that? Rosanna, how would you answer this question from the mailbag?
Well, we have a party program. I'm not really fully understanding the question. It seems very, very broad, or a clearly outlined policy of what would be, objectives. We have a party program, and we understand. We follow the Marxist uh, principles. We um, we have to continually make an analysis of the current situation to be able to decide which direction what's the best direction to go in. It's not there's no absolute in terms of what to do next. There's no check marks of there's no list to check off, so to speak. They're not clearly defined, and so we do have the platform that we follow, but really the art is in applying it in the here and now. What can we use to what is required of us at this moment in time, and that's not always easy.
Right.
I hope I answered that. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think the question is sort of, I feel like this person maybe hasn't gone to cpusa.org and checked out our party program, which actually does have a whole list of different policies that we have, different plans. It's a very long document, but I would encourage you to take time with it. I know that it's actually a very winning document. Anita, maybe would you like to inform everybody who's watching a little bit of how the party comes up with this document, with the party program? Because I know that we've got a party convention coming up next year.
Sure. I would love to talk about it, Taryn. It's something I have been involved in the past. Going up to the 2019 convention, we did a complete rewrite of our party program, which had been approved in 2005. So we approved the new version in 2019, and we'll probably do some very minor edits and talk about it again in 2024 when we have our convention. But yeah, the segment that you presented there is very relevant. I'd like to dispute that it's a long document. I know people keep saying it's long, 60 pages or something like that. One can read 60 pages, I think. And it's just and it's very concentrated. It really does spell out the policies that we would undertake as a party in power, but it also spells out how we would build the anti-monopoly coalition, and what kind of features would be. Oh, there you go. Yes, your producer and I zeroed in on exactly the same passages of the program. So that means great minds think alike, I think, or communist minds do. But there is a very specific that's why we call it the program. It spells out exactly what we want to do and how we want to get there, and what might be the obstacles in our way, and how would we fight against those. So so I think the answer to the question of the mailbag is absolutely we have plans. We have very specific demands that we would make if those demands haven't been already made. And as Rosanna said, we have to constantly revise our situation as maybe the threat of fascism grows and wanes from time to time. We may adjust our demands. Some may come to the fore and others are on the back burner. But yes, we have a program, and it's a very concise and can't have a 3-page plan on what we would do. It's a complicated situation, so we spell it out in great detail.
Right, for sure. And people really do deserve to see that level of thought and planning and consideration into what the working class in this country deserves and is entitled to, because we do create all of the wealth. Scott, what do you think might be a little bit different between how the Communist Party comes up with its program and its platforms, and say one of the two bourgeois parties like the Democrats or the Republicans when they come up with their election platforms? What do you think makes our process different from theirs?
Well, I think the level of collectivity is different. Our process is not dominated by, the biggest donors. Our process is not a popularity contest. It's based on thorough discussion, consultation at the club level, at the district level, at the national level. We're going to start pre-convention discussion soon, and for 4 months we're going to look over our party's work, think about collectively how we can improve it, and that'll be the basis for moving on. But on this question of a platform, I did want to say as well that our party program is a very broad theoretical document, right? It talks about our outlook on the world at the present stage of the struggle for democracy and for socialism. As we move more and more into running candidates under our own banner, under our own party name, we will have to develop more tailored electoral platforms, right? So if you think about parties that have a big role in their parliamentary systems, in India, for example, or in Portugal or France or other countries, the party will issue a kind of an electoral platform that says, on this specific issue, this is our detailed policy solution. This is what we support. This is what we would form coalitions based on. So there is a more, focused kind of platform document, but we're not yet at a stage where our participation in that work is sufficient to develop that, maybe. But we will have to develop it going forward.
Right, because people deserve more than slogans. They deserve those thought out, really consultative democratic plans that will deliver on socialism in this country. So I would just encourage the person who wrote in to go to cpusa.org, look at our party program, and if you have any questions about it, feel free to consult the mailbag once again. Okay, so then I am going to say that Scott has the last word, and we will close it out for this week. We will be back next week, and then after next week's episode, we will be taking a break until next year. So until then, stay strong, stay safe, and no matter what, be sure to stay in the fight. And we'll see you all next week. Thank you all.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Darren.